Hello, welcome back to Big Mouth. Yes, it all kicked off last night with the Spider-Man fandom because a guy called Richard Wenk, who is developing a Kraven the Hunter movie for the Sony Spider-Man verse, spoke about his script. He spoke about a moment where Kraven the Hunter comes face to face with Spider-Man. That has made the whole fandom explode and assume that Sony are taking back Spider-Man from the MCU. Of course, there could be another school of thought. They could have done a deal with Marvel Studios so they can use him in the Spider-Verse as well as them using Tom Holland Spider-Man as well in the MCU. Now, how can you have a Spider-Verse franchise without Spider-Man? You can't. Now, with the success of Venom, a lot of assumptions are being made. Some people, like John Campea, believe that because it's been successful, they don't need Spider-Man. But if I'm a business person, I'm thinking I may make $1 billion from a Venom movie. And if I bring Spider-Man, I can double that. You need Spider-Man. You need Spider-Man to meet Venom. You need Spider-Man to meet Kraven the Hunter or Morbius or whoever. So where do I stand on all this? Well, when I think about Spider-Man Homecoming, I think about a very average Spider-Man film. Let me ask you this. How can Spider-Man Homecoming make less than Black Panther? A Spider-Man movie really should be reaching $1 billion. You know, he was in a fully formed, successful superhero franchise. But still, it didn't get the rewatches in theatres that it should have done. Because Spider-Man Homecoming isn't a great Spider-Man movie. It's okay. The best thing about Spider-Man Homecoming and the MCU Spider-Man is Tom Holland. That element they've got right. He's very talented. No question, he portrays Spider-Man in the right way. But unfortunately, by having a younger Aunt May, for me, doesn't work. They cast totally the wrong actor for Aunt May. Having Tony Stark as this mentor, for me, doesn't work either. How can you have a Spider-Man verse without Jameson, without the Daily Bugle, without the Osborns? For me, I need all of those elements for it to work. It doesn't mean you have to repeat what Sam Raimi did, but the reality is a Spider-Man movie hasn't worked creatively since Raimi. Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 were excellent. And an unpopular opinion, but I think elements of Spider-Man 3 were certainly better than Spider-Man Homecoming. They were more interested in diversity in Spider-Man Homecoming than the creative element. Now, I don't care what colour MJ is. It doesn't really bother me. They can paint her purple as far as I'm concerned. But they seemed a bit scared of the situation. And at the end of the film, we get the fact that her initials are MJ. Now, for me, that wasn't very clever. If you're going to cast that young actor as MJ, just go for it. You know, you've got to be brave in these situations. You either do these things or you don't. For me, probably, mostly people went to see Spider-Man Homecoming because Michael Keaton was in it. And maybe, I think actually, he was the best thing about the movie. Tom Holland was brilliant. No question. He works as Spider-Man. But for me, the way Kevin Feige went with Spider-Man and Homecoming just didn't work for me. And it doesn't work for many Spider-Man fans. In fact, with last night's kind of news of what Richard Wenk said, breaking, I think that many people just kind of thought we'd actually rather Spider-Man back at Sony. Yes, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 wasn't what we wanted, but it was okay. It made okay money, and maybe they can get it right this time. I don't know, but I just feel that when Spider-Man was going to the MCU, we were all excited because he's the head honcho of the MCU verse, of the Marvel verse. This is the top character that Marvel have. And we thought this was the final piece of the jigsaw. But it hasn't been the final piece of the jigsaw. And creatively, they made mistakes with Homecoming. And as I say, when Black Panther makes more money than the Spider-Man film, you need to start questioning things. Now, Sony own the Spider-Man character in terms of movies. The only reason he's in the MCU is because they agreed to it. Sony have had many, many problems in the past years. Financially, they've had a lot of flops. But with Venom actually working and making money, this changes the playing field. Why do you think so many MCU fans were putting in negative reviews? Why do you think there was so much negativity before this movie was released? Because everyone who's part of the MCU fandom is scared that Sony are going to take Spider-Man back. And the reality is they can do it. They have the power. And the problem, you see, Fox have always owned Marvel characters as well. And now Disney have been able to say, right, we'll take that. We'll buy you, swallow you whole, and now we can do what we want with those Marvel characters. Well, Sony's too big. Even when they're struggling, Sony are too big. They cannot be bought out. They will not be allowed to be bought out by Disney. It's not going to happen. And there's been a lot of disagreements between Sony and Marvel Studios in terms of how you go out a Spider-Man movie. We know they were desperate to have Spider-Man and Venom, and they couldn't really agree with Marvel Studios. And because of disagreement right now, they had to go with it. Because obviously, Homecoming did okay. But still, I don't think it made about 800 million, I think, which is pretty good, isn't it? That is a good return. But for me, it should have done better. And even I heard a lot of nonsense about being the best Spider-Man film ever made. But ultimately, the reality is it's nowhere near the best Spider-Man film ever made. The best two Spider-Man films ever made are Raimi's Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, because he got it right. No, he didn't have web blasters. They were coming out of his arm, which I didn't mind, to be honest with you, even as a Spider-Man fan, because the films were so good and they really worked. And I mean, Raimi set the template of how you make a Marvel movie. Let's be honest about this. The man's a genius. And for me, it's a big shame that he'll never make a Spider-Man film again. And as I've said so many times as well, I think that elements of Spider-Man 3 were actually better than Spider-Man Homecoming. Raimi knew what he was doing. But unfortunately, with Disney and Marvel Studios, they have other ideas, and it's not all about the creative element. And when you look at the MCU right now, they made about $2 billion on Avengers Infinity War, but made a lot less than that with Ant-Man 2, because Ant-Man 2 is just like a middling episode of a TV series. It was a filler episode. And it was an okay film, but nothing special. And the box office figures show you. I mean, in reality, you put 2 and 2 together and get 4 and say, well, with Avengers Infinity War coming before it. But again, I don't understand why Avengers Infinity War was released before Ant-Man. It should have been Ant-Man 2, then Avengers Infinity War in the summer. So I don't really understand why they kind of did that, because you get this anticlimax, because you get this epic, compelling film, which is meant to be like a season finale. And then you bring back a middling episode of the series in Ant-Man 2. So I didn't really understand that. And as I say, a lot of Spider-Man fans will be quite happy with Spider-Man returning to Sony. And, there's many reasons for this, because a lot of them are not very happy with what's going on with Spider-Man within the MCU. So it is very interesting with Venom being successful. And I mean, I think we all would have died with pleasure, with happiness, if we saw Spider-Man and Venom in the same movie. It should have happened, but it didn't, because Marvel Studios didn't want that. So this deal will finish. Now, whether the deal is renewed, I think like the Henry Cavill situation, when there was news from the Hollywood Reporter a few weeks ago that he was leaving the role of Superman. I think that was put out by his people to try and force Warner Brothers' hands to give Cavill what he wants. And what Cavill wants isn't money. He wants a direct sequel to Man of Steel, Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. And this is what the kind of separation is between him and Walter Hamada. Walter Hamada maybe wants to do something new with Superman. And I think what happened is Michael B. Jordan, that rumour coming out that he was going to play Superman, that was Warner Brothers being silly and trying to I suppose it was a reply to what the news that they were releasing through the Hollywood Reporter. And this is what happens. And I think this guy Wenk coming out saying that Spider-Man will meet this other character in the movie face to face is then say, remember who owns the Spider-Man, name in movies. Just remember, we can take it away from you. So I think they're trying to force their hand in the next deal to let them use Spider-Man in their Spider-Man verse. But it's very acceptable that Sony could just take back the character. Now, I don't know where Sony are coming from with this. Look, their money men and women are going to be sitting there thinking, where is the most money going to come from? Letting Spider-Man remain in the MCU or taking him back in this verse that we've created? Now, I suppose leaving him in the MCU is printed ready money. At least they'll make about 700-800 million a movie. But there's a bigger potential if they bring him back to their verse, because if their Spider-Man verse works with all these different characters and with Spider-Man as well, then there's even more money for Sony. And because this has worked, because, you know, let's be honest, Marvel fans love characters like Morbius and Venom. They're interested by these characters. And these are characters that, first of all, they own, and that Marvel Studios are not interested in because they're darker characters. And that's not what their universe is about. That's the problem. Because of Disney, because of the way they are, they don't want these characters. But the fans do want these characters. And they do want Spider-Man mixing with these characters. I certainly do as a Spider-Man fan as well. So we have an impasse here. We have a kind of civil war between Sony and Marvel Studios. Ultimately, Sony will win this. If Sony wants Spider-Man back, they'll take him. And this has been the big fear with the release of Venom, and this is why you've had these devious Marvel fans, and even maybe Disney have constructed these negative reviews as well. You don't know what goes on in this industry. You know, this is a cutthroat industry. And I mean, we've seen what MCU fans have tried to do with reactions to DCEU movies as well. We know how they work. But let me be clear to you, MCU fans are not 100% of the kind of Marvel comic fandom. MCU fans are a mixture of mainstream movie fans and a selection of Marvel fans. They're not all of them. And this is the problem. So there's an impasse here. Some people like the MCU, some people don't. But the reason the MCU makes so much money is because of the mainstream audience really liking these films as easy, generic films to watch. You know, they're, as I call them, popcorn crunching films. So that's why they make so much money. So I think it's fascinating to see what happens now. I'd say grab a bag of popcorn and see how this all works out. Now, the best thing for everyone would probably be for Marvel Studios and Sony Pictures to agree to be able to use Spider-Man in the MCU and in the Sonyverse as well. That's best for everyone, because if they don't do that, Sony will just say, do you know what? We don't care. Now, of course, this could be a messy situation because Feige has no control over what goes on with the Sony movies. His only control is with the MCU movies, as we all know. Now, Feige's going to be saying, I don't want this to happen because I don't have control. And if they mess it up, it makes me look bad. But the reality is, Feige's got no power here. He hasn't. The power is with Sony and what they decide to do. So this new agreement, or lack of a new agreement, is a pivotal moment for the character of Spider-Man. Because let me give you, as some people say, let's put a tinfoil hat on, right? Say Sony take back Spider-Man and their Spider-Verse works and it starts to work better than the MCU. You think that's impossible. But the MCU have made over, 20 films now? They're about to finish their first kind of set of movies, if you like. There's no reason why a darker Spider-Man verse with all these characters, with Spider-Man, can't work if done properly. Even with Venom's issues, that film is breaking records because of the popularity of the Venom character. So it's like audiences are quite forgiving because they're desperate to see these movies. So I've seen Venom. It's a very highly entertaining, exciting film. Like all films, it has its flaws and its issues. But it certainly works for what they did. Some people may not agree with that. But the reality is people are going. I know people who've already been 3 or 4 times. And when you've got that repeat viewing, you've got something. So I don't think Venom's a one-off. I don't think it's not going to make money this week. It's going to keep on breaking records. And the more it keeps on breaking records, the more this puts Marvel Studios in a very precarious situation, because they worked so hard to get Spider-Man because Sony were in such a desperate situation. But with Venom doing so well, Sony are no longer in this position. And what Disney don't want is Sony to start getting powerful again. And they will, because they're Sony. Sony are massive. You can't keep a big company down. It's like Warner Brothers. You can't keep big companies down. You can't have this situation where Disney is dominant for the next 20, 30 years, like some of you think. Look at the problems with Star Wars. You know, they've started to become very woke. We've seen it in their animated films as well. And this is beginning to feed in to their MCU films. And again, that's a problem, because once you put the creative behind diversity and you say there's diversity and inclusion first and the creative second, you've got a big problem. That's not how this industry should work. But that is how it's working right now in Hollywood because of what's going on politically. They've become so political because they think, I suppose, they can gain voters to the left through their films. But ultimately, that makes the creative element suffer. And me as a movie fan and you as a movie fan don't care about the politics or inclusion. Yes, we want diversity. We want everyone to have a fair crack at the whip. But if you put that situation behind the creative situation and say, well, the creative's the creative and this is more important. Well, it's not. It's not. So, but the pivotal decision is where Spider-Man is going to lay his hat. And ultimately, I assume Tom Holland can continue playing Spider-Man within the Sonyverse because he's their character. Literally, he's on loan. So it's going to be very exciting to see what happens. What do I want to see happen? Personally, I'd be kind of excited if he goes back to Sony, especially with the verse they're creating. I think it's very interesting. I think that they've got some good people involved. Richard Wenk is another good man. So what can happen with all this is very exciting. I think that Marvel Studios didn't really foresee Sony being so passive-aggressive with their own universe. Or maybe they knew they were going to do it, but they thought they'd failed doing it. And I think Venom's success has changed everything. Spider-Man along with Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman are the top of the superhero names. If you get those characters right, and personally, I don't think the MCU since Captain America Civil War have got that character right, because they haven't. And so this leaves a great opportunity for Sony Studios to say, do you know what? He belongs to us. Tough luck. We're taking him. You can't have him. Ultimately, what do I think is going to happen? I do believe, because these are money people, these are business people. They can't bite their noses off to spite their face. They're going to, look, Feige and Marvel Studios are going to have to accept the fact that they're going to have to allow Spider-Man to be in this Sony movieverse, or they're going to lose him. They don't want to lose him, because with rumours of Captain America going, which I think is ridiculous. I mean, Chris Evans' Captain America is the most relatable character within the MCU. An ordinary human being who becomes this amazing superhero. He's my favourite. To lose him is absolutely ridiculous. Why would you do that? I'm hoping it doesn't happen, and we'll see. I suppose it's inevitable that Robert Downey Jr. will eventually leave, because I think he has ambitions of less generic films and maybe more independent films. So that's something that everyone will have to take on the chin. So it's very exciting, but I do believe ultimately they'll have to, Sony and Marvel Studios will have to share Spider-Man within their movies, or Marvel Studios will lose him. Now, if Marvel Studios are so stubborn, they say, no, we can't have him in your films, then obviously Sony are just going to say, do you know what? We can't play here. You know, you can't expect everything to go your way. So, very interesting. Spider-Man fans, let me know what you think down below. Like or dislike, I don't mind. Just have a reaction. Let me know what you think. Should Spider-Man remain within the MCU or go back to Sony? Or should he be in both film universes? Let me know and have a beautiful day.